he says, I'll take you there. Oh, lion to the races. Oh, come on. I said, now come on, I'll go within. I'll take you there. Oh, come on, yes, Lord, breathe it in. I'll take you there. Go on, you know, just pray it in. I'll take you there. You're gonna live it, live it, live it, let me take you there. Oh, 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 yeah. Ooh, gonna pray it in, y'all, let me take you there. Oh, yeah. God is within, without, all around, yeah. Pray and sing and shout about it, yeah, yeah, yeah. Come on, let me take you there. Oh, I said, let me take you there. Take me to church.
All right. And we are there. Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Sunday to you. We've been working with a series of lessons, and we're going to be doing this series through the whole calendar year. And the series name is The Quest, a journey of spiritual rediscovery. And we're here to really connect with and rediscover our own understanding and awareness and our own path to experiencing more of the presence of the divine. And so today, our lesson title, interestingly enough, the lesson title in The Quest is What God Is. And I did a class on this some years ago, and one of the members of the class said, came up to me sometime later and said, I'd like you to do a talk sometime, and I want you the talk to be, what is God really? And I kind of thought about that, and I had to laugh, because it makes the assumption that we're not really talking about God the rest of the time, but they want to know really what God is. And I really thought that was an interesting question. And so my title today is, what is God really? And so when we think about God, I came across a story some years ago, and I think it's a well-told story in unity circles especially. There was a kindergarten teacher who was observing her classroom of children, and while they were all drawing. And so she would occasionally walk around, and she saw one little girl that was drawing something, and she was curious about it and said, what are you drawing? And she said, well, I'm drawing God. And she said, well, hon, no one really knows what God looks like. And the little girl said, well, they will when I'm done. You know, we actually have this understanding a lot of times in unity is that God created humankind in the image and after the likeness of God. And ever since, humankind has been trying to return the favor. We keep trying to make God in our image and after our likeness. We give God the kind of attributes that we think that God has because of who we are. And there's some real truth in that. And the reality is that each and every one of us has a different way of understanding, a different way of experiencing that which we call the divine. There was a man who was in Topeka, Kansas, and decided he was going to write a book about churches around the country. So he was traveling around the country and going to all these different churches. And as he went to all these different churches, he came across one church, and in the vestibule of the church, they had a telephone, and it was a golden telephone. And the golden telephone had a sign over it that said, direct call to God, $10,000. And he was thinking about that and just wondering about that, and went to the pastor and asked him about it, and the pastor said, well, yeah, that's a direct line into God, and if you pay $10,000, you'll be able to talk to God directly. And the man thought about that and thought, well, that's really something. Now, he didn't have the $10,000 at the time, so he didn't call. So he wound up going to another church, and pretty soon he found that there was another church that had the same phone. It had a golden phone, and it had a sign that says, direct call to God, $10,000. And he thought about that, and then he started going to different churches and found that these phones are showing up in all these different churches. And then he wound up coming to a church here in Austin. And he saw that there was a phone hanging on the wall, and it said, direct call to God, 35 cents. And he was surprised, and he said, what's this about? So he talked to the pastor, and the pastor said, well, yeah, from here it's a direct call. It's a local call, you see. Well, we all have our ideas about where God is and about what God is. And so part of our work today is to really just kind of explore some of the thoughts and ideas that people come to about this thing that we call God. And I say thing, and that's really a misnomer in and of itself, isn't it? Because is God really a thing? Or is God everything? My suggestion is that when we think about the divine, we have a tendency to think about God as a thing sometimes, as an it, as a being. Sometimes we've been presented with this idea that God is a him or a her. And what if that's all just something that we made up? I'm going to suggest to you that is something that we all made up. We create this idea of the divine so that we can actually have a more connected understanding or experience of that. And so when we really think about that, it really kind of helps us to, the idea is to try and help us to make more of a connection, but I'm going to suggest to you that sometimes the way that we think about the divine is actually one of the things that blocks us from really having more of an experience of the divine. Matthew chapter 11, verse 25, Jesus said, I thank thee, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that thou hast hidden these things from the wise and understanding and revealed them to babes. We have a tendency sometimes to try to create this concept of God. And then we create the concept of God, and then we find that there are things and ways that God exists beyond our concept, but we try to get God to fit within the concept. We do that with each other, we realize. We create concepts of each other. We have belief systems about who we are, and we have belief systems about who others are. And when people try to step outside of the concept we have of them, we get pretty upset about it. We don't like that at all. No, that's not who you are. This is who you are. We get them locked into a particular way of thinking. And so part of our expansion and our spiritual growth is to always have an expanding awareness and expanding possibility of that which is divine, that which is beyond our own individual beliefs and ideas and concepts. It's important to have a belief, you might say, but in some ways, it's our beliefs that actually get in the way of our truly experiencing, knowing more of that divine nature. I'm always reminded of the story, of course, of the 6 blind men and the elephant. We all have a different way of conceptualizing. And I've told the story a number of times, and I just think it's just a great story to implement a deeper understanding of how we can all have different ideas and perceptions of that which is divine. But the 6 blind men and the elephant is about 6 men who are told to describe an elephant. And one went up to the side of the elephant and touched the side of it and said, well, it's obvious that an elephant is like a wall. And then another one touched the trunk of an elephant and said, no, an elephant is like a snake. And another one touched the leg of an elephant and said, no, an elephant's like the trunk of a tree. And then another one touched the tail of the elephant and said, well, that's crazy. You guys are all nuts. An elephant is like a vine. And then one touched an ear of an elephant and said, man, you guys are all nuts. An elephant is like a leaf. Which one is right? And the reality is they all are. They're all there seeing and experiencing the divine from their own perception. And that's one of the things that makes us really understand that the mystery of that which is divine is something that is also very deeply personal, that each and every one of us will have our own unique experience of that. And yet there are archetypal ways that each of us as humans will know and experience more of God and the divine in our lives. In our lesson, one of the things it talks about is that, can we really explain how it is that a small watermelon seed can draw from all of the elements of the earth, from the rays of the sun and the beautiful liquid that comes in water, and then form into this amazing, gigantic, beautiful fruit that's ripe and green and lush and sweet. And how can you explain that? If you can learn to explain that, in many ways you can learn to explain the presence of God. But I'm going to suggest to you that I don't think any of us has the ability to really understand at this point in our being how all that works. But it doesn't mean that we can't appreciate it. I don't know about you, but I like watermelon. I love watermelon. You know, electricity is kind of interesting also, because how many of you know how electricity works? There may be a few engineers in the group that can give you a pretty good explanation, but even Thomas Edison himself said he could not really explain how it works. But it doesn't stop you from walking into a room and flipping on a light switch, does it? And so part of the understanding and experience of the divine really is not so much trying to understand it with our minds. Let me say that differently. Trying to understand it with our intellect. Because sometimes it's our intellect that will actually block us from experiencing that divine experience. Because oftentimes, the only way to really experience the divine is not through the intellect, but through the experience of our heart. Sometimes we can experience the divine through our senses. Sometimes we can experience the divine through just a knowing, through our intuition. And there's different ways that we talk about the divine. We have different attributes that we give to the divine. Attributes of truth. In my yoga practice a couple of times, we've been doing a chant that I really like called Sut Nam. Sut Nam. And Sut, the word Sut means truth, and Nam means identity. And as you chant this, it's a beautiful chant, and as I thought about that, Nam, the idea is Sut, truth, and Nam, identity. And I think about identity, that also means name, it means a name. So truth is my name, but name also means nature. Truth is my character. Truth is my identity. Or you could say, my I am. I am truth. And so as you chant this, you're actually owning and taking in an understanding of our own unique nature. Because in unity, we understand that there really is only one presence and one power in the universe. This is one of the conceptions of God that I think is so important and so significant that unity talks about. Many, many times when we look at conceptions of God, there is a dualistic conception that there's God and then there's not God. How many of you have been out in that place where there's not God? We think we have, don't we? There are times when we have this conception that somehow God is over there or up there, but not here. I know we've all had that kind of experience in some way, in some form. And it's not a fun place, is it? But I'm going to suggest to you that it's just simply a conception. See, it's a belief system that we in our own minds have created, that there's somehow something that is God and something that is not God. And that's an illusion. Ultimately, the real key awareness that we talk about in unity is coming to this place where we recognize that there is the divine in everything. We talk about it in unity in terms of the omnis. How many of you know what I'm talking about when I talk about the omnis? You know, some years ago when I was a minister in unity in Charlottesville, Virginia, we met in the Omni Hotel. It was a great place because we really were connecting with the omni, right? Well, omni, we talk about God as being omnipresent. But in unity, you can hear this in actually a lot of different faiths and religions as God being omnipresent, which means everywhere present. But we take it a little further in unity because it seems to say that when we say that God is everywhere present, that there's somehow that there is a being that is everywhere present. But in unity, we say God is not simply omnipresent, but God is omnipresence. Omnipresence. What that really means is that God is not a being that is present everywhere, but God is that which is everywhere. That is always. That is, there's no separation, there's no place where God is not. I love that saying, there is no spot where God is not. You know that one? There is no spot where God is not. You know, even in, your little finger or Even those places in you where you think that there's not God, even in those places that seem dark, those are illusions. It's not the reality. It's not the truth. There's a spark of divinity in every place and situation and circumstance. And it's one of the things I think is so reassuring to me about this understanding, is that when I'm in those darkest places, I know that I'm ultimately not separated from the divine. If I will turn my attention back to that knowing and back to that awareness and back to that understanding, it really brings me more into an experience of the light. Make sense? Anybody been in that place where you felt like God is somewhere off in a distance? Yeah. And we have a tendency to think about God in that way, don't we? We pray up to God. And I think that's nothing more than a metaphor. When we talk about heaven, we're talking about a place that is higher, but we're really talking about a higher awareness. We're really looking at raising our awareness and our energy to such a place that we're thinking in ways that are uplifting, thinking in ways that are life-enhancing, thinking and holding images and awarenesses and ideas that are really feeding us in a spiritual way and moving us to a higher understanding. We think about different attributes of God. We think God is love and God is peace, and we think about God as universal mind, as spirit, as substance, as we think about God in terms of being a creator, the creator. We talk about God in terms of father and mother, a divine mind. All of these things are just ways that we have of describing this, something that is hard to put into words. In fact, in some ways, every time you put a word on the divine, you're missing the mark. Because ultimately, the divine is something that is beyond the words. And yet, the words we have are like the finger pointing at the moon. And we have a tendency sometimes to worship the finger. We do that, I think, with Jesus sometimes. Jesus was here to point at the divine. He was one who came to show us and teach us about that divine nature, not just in our life and in the world, but within each and every one of us. And sometimes, though, we mistake the messenger for the message. We do that with Buddha. We do that with anyone who basically is trying to show us the way. And what we have a tendency to do is, oh, okay, and then we worship the finger that's pointing at the moon. But the moon is something more, something greater, and the divine is something greater. No matter where we are, there is an omnipresence. There is a power also. In unity, we talk about this idea of God not only being omnipresent, but we talk about there being one power. Omnipower, omnipotent is the word that we use sometimes. And when we try to describe God as being one presence and one power, again, unity is taking it a little differently in that we're not seeing that there is this being out there that is all-powerful, but that the divine is really all-power. Omnipotence. It is all the power that is. If there is power, it is ultimately of the divine. And so we have a tendency, though, then to think, well, if that's true, then what about all this power that is harmful or hurtful or evil or whatever? And that's a whole other lesson. We're going to get into that. But I want to say a little bit about that. The one thing about this idea that there's really only one power in the universe is that it's a power that works in and through us. And part of the magnificence of God's creation that is you, that is humankind, is that you have the ability to choose. We each have the ability to choose how that power is being used. We have the ability to choose what we are attributing that power to. We have a tendency to give that power to others in our lives. We make gods. We make idols, you might say. We make others powerful. Or sometimes, if we're really into our ego, we make ourselves powerful. That it's all me. Or sometimes we give our power away and we think, well, I have no power, it's all them. And what we're doing is moving ourselves into the energy of victimhood, which is basically, it's a way of worshiping an idol. I know that seems kind of strange, but what we're saying is, I have no power, they have the power, whoever it is that they are. You know the they that we're talking about, right? We all got a they in mind at different times. When we play that game, it's a one up and one down. But when we really understand that there really is only one power, and that there's no person, place, or thing that can stop or keep us from experiencing the divine, except our own choices and our own decisions. And that's the real power that exists within each and every one of us. We have that power within us to say, this has no power over me. This has no power over me. That's a statement that we call in unity a denial. This has no power over me. There's one power in my life, and that power is the divine. Think about that circumstance or situation right now that you feel like in some way that you are experiencing being victimized from. Anybody got any of those? I think we all do on some. It's part of the human experience, I think, in some ways. We have a tendency, it's part of our development, you might say. It's part of our learning process. But the power that exists within you is so much more and so much greater than any power that you've given to that situation or circumstance. I love that saying, don't tell your problems don't tell God how big your problems are. Tell your problems how big your God is. There's a power that's greater than any circumstance or situation that you're confronted with now, and it has for you, in you, a greater good, and is working toward that good in some form, in some way. You may not comprehend it completely. Again, thank God, just said, I'm grateful that you hid this from the wise, or the intellect, you might say. But there's a knowing that each of us can tap into, that where we can experience more of that power that it comes through us. I'll share a personal story with you about that. I was going through a very challenging time in my life back in my 20s, and was really hurting pretty bad. I'd had a breakup in a relationship and was just feeling really depressed, and I'd been drinking a lot and, in a down place and really feeling in a dark place. And I really reached a place where I had decided that I was going to take my car and I was going to drive off of the Arkansas River Bridge into the river. And I remember driving up, and I'd driven at the time I was back living with my parents, and it was really in just a dark place. And I remember pulling up and driving up, and I was sitting there in the driveway where my parents' home, and this is while I was still in college, I think on a summer break, I think. And as I'm sitting there, I just really felt this pain, this hurt, this darkness. I felt like there was this place in me where I just didn't really have any awareness or faith that there was a God. I didn't think there was going to be any help. I was really grieving deeply. And I remember crying and just pounding on the steering wheel, God, if you exist, I need to know. I need to know. I need to know whether you really exist. And I didn't hear anything. And I was expecting something. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I didn't hear anything. I didn't feel anything, and I was just thinking, okay, well, that's it. I'm going to go drive off the bridge. So I start the car up, and the radio comes on. And when the radio comes on, a song was on the radio that I'd never heard before. And I think I've never heard this song on the radio since. And it was a song by John Denver. And the name of the song was Sinking Skies and Dancing Water. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with that song, but the chorus goes like this. Well, I can tell you some of the words, actually. So many years ago, I can't remember now, someone was waiting for me. I had the answers to all of my questions, and love was so easy to see. I didn't know. When I was younger, I should have known better. I thought that life was nothing. Through all the faces and all of the changes, the one that I lost sight of was you. I didn't know. I didn't know, and here's the chorus. I didn't know I could see you in singing skies and dancing waters and laughing children and in growing old and in the heart and in the spirit and in the truth when it is told. I can't do the whole song for you. Sometime I'll sing it for you. But in that moment, I knew. I knew that God was real. I knew that God existed. I knew that God was speaking directly to me through a song I'd never heard before on the radio. And I haven't heard it on the radio since, but I have that song, I could tell you. And when I feel down and out and troubled, I go back and I listen to that again. And I know that there's a presence and a power and an intelligence, which is another omni that we talk about in unity. God is omniscient, all-knowing. We talk about God as being one mind. God is omniscience. So God is not just a being that is a great big brain, one mind, but God is all-knowing, all intelligence, all awareness. God, you might say, is all consciousness. And you and I are a part of that. And our each individual unique consciousness is a part of that unique consciousness. And we can open ourselves up to experience more of that in different ways in our lives. There's lots of different ways that we do that. And I want to share with you some thoughts about that. Course in Miracles says this. I love this way that the Course in Miracles describe God's. God is light. God is the light in which I see. God is the mind with which I think. God is the love in which I forgive. God is the strength in which I trust. There is nothing to fear, for there is only love. Love that. Yeah. And I'll read to you from one of my favorite unity poets, James Dillett Freeman. I had the privilege of taking a prayer class with James Dillett Freeman many years ago in my ministerial training. But this is one that I love to share. And it's called What God is Like. I did not know what God is like until a friendly word came to me in an hour of need. And it was God I heard. I did not know what God is like until I heard love's feet on errands of God's mercy go up and down life's street. I did not know what God is like until I felt a hand clasp mine and lift me when alone. I had no strength to stand. I think I know what God is like, for I have seen the face of God's Son looking at me from all of the human race. Love that one. Now, I'm going to close my lesson with one of my favorites also, from James Dillett Freeman. This is a poem that was actually written and has been probably traveled farther than any other poem in history because it now sits on the moon. It's one that was taken by one of the astronauts. I think it was Edgar Mitchell, if I'm not mistaken, or it may have been Buzz Aldrin. Yes, thank you. Took this to the moon with him. And this one's called I Am There. Do you need me? I am there. You cannot see me, yet I am the light you see by. You cannot hear me, yet I speak through your voice. You cannot feel me, yet I am the power at work in your hands. I am at work, though you do not understand my ways. I am at work, though you do not recognize my works. I am not strange visions, I am not mysteries. Only in absolute stillness, beyond self, can you know me as I am. And then, but as a feeling and a faith. Yet, I am there. Yet, I answer. Yet, I hear. And when you need me, I am there. Even if you deny me, I am there. Even when you feel most alone, I am there. Even in your fears, I am there. Even in your pain, I am there. I am there when you pray and when you do not pray. I am in you, and you are in me. Only in your mind can you feel separate from me, for only in your mind are the mist of yours and mine. Yet only with your mind can you know me and experience me. Empty your heart of empty fears. When you get yourself out of the way, I am there. You can of yourself do nothing, but I can do all. I am in all. Though you may not see the good, good is there, for I am there. I am there because I have to be, because I am. Only in me does the world have meaning. Only out of me does the world take form. Only because of me does the world go forward. I am the law on which the movement of the stars and the growth of living cells are founded. I am the love that is the law's fulfilling. I am assurance. I am peace. I am oneness. I am the law that you can live by. I am the love that you can cling to. I am your assurance. I am your peace. I am one with you. I am. Though you fail to find me, I do not fail you. Though your faith in me is unsure, my faith in you never wavers, because I know you, because I love you. Beloved, I am there. And that's our lesson for the week. Let's move into our meditation time. So we move into that place of stillness, of silence, of peace. And we breathe into that space, breathing in and out, knowing and opening our hearts and our mind to the experience of the divine, the one presence that is everywhere, in all, through all, the one power, the power to overcome, the power to be even more, the power of unlimited possibility and potential, the power that flows through our hearts, our minds, and our whole being. We open our our hearts and minds to that one mind, the mind of spirit, that is not just all knowledge, but is knowing. Is there something you would know? On some level, the essence of you that is one with Spirit already knows. And so you just allow that inspiration, that intuition, that creative spark to guide and direct. And we rest in the knowing that there is an order in all things, in that one presence and power. And we're willing to trust that it is there, always, to protect, to heal, to guide, to direct, to nurture, to enlighten, and to be connected. Breathe it in. And just let a feeling of gratitude come into your heart for the presence of the divine, always, here and now. Take another nice deep breath. Give thanks. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes. And so it is.